Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talking Logistics, where we have conversations with thought leaders and newsmakers in the supply chain logistics industry. And it's my pleasure to welcome to today's program Brandon Brissette, who's Director of Business Development at Ryder. And we're going to be talking today about winning the aftermarket supply chain. Now, this is a part of supply chain that, in my opinion, doesn't get enough attention, but it is really a critical component to the supply chains of many companies, especially those in the automotive and industrial manufacturing and aerospace industries. And it's played a more important role today than ever before when it comes to driving profitability as well as customer satisfaction and loyalty. So certainly, it's an area that I'm looking forward to speaking with Brandon here to kind of learn about what are some of the key trends that are happening in the aftermarket supply chain and what are some leading best practices going on there. If you are joining us live today and you want to ask Brandon a question as we're having our conversation here, and certainly something that we encourage here at Talking Logistics, we really want to make this conversational. You can post a question via the question button or the chat feature, and I'll keep an eye on that. And certainly, if we've got time and it's a good and appropriate question, I'll weave that into our conversation. I do want to remind you that if you are joining us as a guest or as a visitor, you do have to sign in first before you're able to ask a question. And with that, Brandon, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Adrian. Appreciate you having me on. I'm excited and nervous all the same to do this, but again, appreciate you taking the time to talk with me and excited about our conversation here.
Great, great. No reason to be nervous. I don't bite, and certainly people watching this don't bite either. And it's hard to bite someone via the internet anyway. So. Let's start before we dive into this topic of aftermarket supply chain with kind of the question I ask all my guests, because I'm always curious about how people get into the supply chain logistics industry. So why don't you briefly tell us a little bit about your career path, how and why you got into supply chain logistics, and what your current role and responsibilities are there at Ryder.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I've been in supply chain and logistics for about 17 years. My entry role into it really was kind of on an internship basis. I ended up working with a 3PL that was starting up a new cross-dock container management center for General Motors. And it literally was first day of startup was my first day of work. And within 2 weeks, they had made me an offer for, I guess you would call it a salary position, which at the time was great for me because I was coming right out of high school basically, and got in and really within those first 2 weeks kind of took over a lot of responsibilities, was able to take on a lot and I think make things happen to the point where they offered me a very low paying salary position at the time. But since then, I worked for that company for about 3 years, doing various roles between operations, container management, planning, quality. Worked there for 3 years, and then ended up getting an interview with the Ryder for kind of a similar job within the operations, supporting container management, and came over to Ryder so about 14 years ago. It's actually hired in on leap year day, so depending on how you look at dates and everything, this is either my 14th year or my, that'd be 3.5 years, however the math converts, right? But with Ryder, it's been fantastic. I've done a lot of operations management. I've done a ton of engineering. So within my roles, I kind of took on the responsibility of doing warehouse layout, warehouse design, and was able to take on those functions and get into more of the industrial engineering side of it. Supported quality, done program management, and kind of as my career progressed, that really morphed into a lot of business development support, primarily through engineering, in working on new bids and new proposals and things of that nature. That translated within the past 2 years. I took a role in product development, so taking a look at our services that we do and how can we grow those and bring new services to market. Aftermarket being one of the ones that we've been focusing on and really trying to help foster and develop that program. And then recently, within the past year, I took a role in business development and sales. So I kind of stuck my neck out there and said, hey, I'd be really interested. I think I could do great at this. Put me in, coach. So it's kind of where we're at today, and I'm responsible for our automotive and aerospace and industrial vertical within our supply chain group. and really focus on selling, our warehousing, transportation management, and aftermarket targeted services to our customers. So it's kind of it in a nutshell.
Excellent background. I mean, it sounds like you've had a very diverse set of experiences within the logistics service provider industry, and wearing different hats through multiple different roles there. So you certainly bring a unique perspective, across the board there. So let's talk about aftermarket now.
Adrian, looks like I may have lost you. Well, I think the good news is either he's lost me or I've lost him, not sure who. Basically, I'm still on screen, so I'm guessing I'm on cue. And I think what he was going to ask me is just generally the aftermarket space and what does that consist of. And really, when you talk about aftermarket, what we're looking for, or what we're looking at in terms of aftermarket, is anything with a with a long life cycle. So you talk about, cars, parts for aftermarket. You go to Advance Auto. Where can I buy my parts to replace my car and fix my car? You talk about aerospace. Again, it's those same replacement parts that would go on to repair the airplanes, defense vehicles. Any durable good that basically has an afterlife and repair parts that would support that and enhance and keep up the life cycle of the product and keep that product going. That's really the space that the aftermarket consumes, and it's very broad. It's very comprehensive in terms of the different industries and segments. Other areas you can get into are life sciences, medical, where again, medical equipment, things break. The technology, the components within the machines, they break, and they in fact have an aftermarket life cycle as well. You can look at that in terms of even elevators, obviously. So any of those durable goods that are put out there in the industry that really have some sort of afterlife or a long life cycle where you can take and replenish and repair the parts or put new parts on it to keep the machines up, running, and performing as expected. So I mean, that's really the space that we're looking at in terms of the aftermarket and kind of the products, the life cycles, or products, and where they fall in the different industry segments. It looks like we've got Adrian back here.
Yeah, my apologies. Yeah, I'm here. I can see and hear you. I dropped off there for a few seconds, so my apologies. But I think you provided a great. I was able to hear you, so you were able to provide a good foundation there in terms of what aftermarket means. And again, I think it is one of those areas that it's becoming increasingly important in so many different industries. So what do you see? When you talk to clients, when you talk to prospects. What are the biggest supply chain and logistics challenges companies face today with their aftermarket operations, and what are some of the objectives they're trying to achieve?
Well, it's very interesting, and I think if you look at kind of the different players within that, I mean, you've got so an OEM, a manufacturer of the goods, like a General Motors, for instance, they make cars, or a Boeing makes airplanes. You've got the suppliers obviously play a role in that, as well as they supply the parts for manufacturing, but then they also supply the parts in the aftermarket segment as well. And then you've got the distribution channels. So I think a lot of those are maybe more prevalent in the automotive world. When you think of companies like Advance Auto or Murray's or Pep Boys, all those different players out there that really have those different distribution channels other than the OEM. And I think a lot of the common themes that we're seeing within that, there's a couple. I mean, I think number one, across the board, we're hearing that part proliferation it's exploding. I read an article, I want to say yesterday, that basically was talking about the part proliferation with an airplane. It was upwards of 40 some odd thousand parts, right? And so if you start thinking about just the massive amount of updates and upgrades with technology they have on cars today, and all the new releases, and every year there's a model change. So model change could bring to a single car, it's the Chevy Cruze or whatever the car is, it could bring an onslaught of 10 to 1500 different part numbers just for that new minor model change with that part. So again, across the board, it's proliferation is a huge issue. How do you manage that proliferation? How do you manage that proliferation in respect to demand and the ability to serve the customer? Additionally, you think of kind of the long life cycles of products. So I mean, if a car, you think of all the cars out there. I mean, I keep thinking of Jay Leno, right? He's got cars from, 60, 70, 100 some odd cars of his own that are built anywhere from, I'm guessing, 1900s till, the latest model. And the ability to get parts to service those cars and replace those parts and get them when he needs them to get his vehicles back up and running. So again, that proliferation challenge is huge. I think that's number one. I think number two is speed to market. Anywhere you go and look now, customers have options. Be it the internet, be it going to 10 different local parts stores to get things. I mean, customers have options, and I think everybody, everybody within that segment, the OEMs, the distributors, the tier ones, they recognize that and realize and have this belief that if I don't have that part on the shelf ready, available to pick and hand to that guy, the likelihood is that guy is going to go to customer B to go get that product. So I mean, inventory, speed to market, to really just match your customer demand. And then take all of that and just say, okay, well, great. I want to have all of this availability across everywhere that I serve, and all of that boils down to my logistics cost. I mean, it's a cost to serve my customers, right? So if I'm going to carry all this inventory in all these markets, if I'm going to get this product to them as soon as possible, I have high transportation costs to do that. I have high warehousing costs because now I've got these big boxes with all this product in there that's sitting, and I have my inventory costs tied up into this segment. So I mean, it's really trying to pull all of that together and figure out what's my best solution. How do I meet all of these challenges and all these demands of my customer and still remain competitive? I think the biggest thing that you kind of led this off at is that this is kind of I forget your terminology, but basically a segment in the industry that's often put on the back burner to some extent. And a lot of what we've seen is that's true, right? I think a lot of the companies that we talk to are focused on the manufacturing of their product. So the OEMs are primarily focused on the manufacturing side. The suppliers are focused on the manufacturing side of it. And I think what companies are realizing and have realized since 2009 is that their aftermarket business is a very profitable segment of their business. We've talked to several companies that basically say, hey, if I could sell my product at cost because I know that there's this long life cycle of aftermarket service labor as well as aftermarket parts where I'm going to make a lot of money doing that and keeping my product up and running through its normal life cycle. So it's really, that focus is now, I think, being shifted, and they're paying more attention to that and realizing that that's a great source of just profit to the company. And there's a lot of focus on how do I grow that? How do I milk that for more? I mean, whatever terminology you want to put behind it. I mean, there's renewed focus on that. And if there isn't, then obviously the prospects I'm talking to, I mean, I think it's incumbent upon us to kind of point that out and help get them interested in that, because it is a great side of the business that that people don't always focus on or don't have their full attention to.
I kind of a question just popped into my head. I mean, if it is, usually companies focus on an area where, it's very costly or it's hurting margin, right? So they're trying to reduce costs as much as possible, reduce that cost item. If this is so, if it is a margin, opportunity for companies, it's an area that's very profitable for them. What's driving them to focus on this, right? I mean, I think I guess to put it another way, a lot of times when companies in certain parts of the area, certain parts of their company or supply chains where they're quote unquote fat, dumb, and happy, right? Oh, this is all, we're making a ton of money here. You know, you can get a lot of sloppiness, right? Because, you know, profitability kind of masks any kind of inefficiencies and things of that nature. So, I mean, are you seeing nonetheless, even though this is a profitable part of their business, that there is kind of a focus on really being as efficient as possible, being, you know, we're looking at the cost side of things as well to manage that effectively, to, you know, even further make this a higher margin or a higher, more profitable side of their business?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think a lot of, you know, my perspective is, you know, I think a lot of companies, again, during the whole 2009 period going forward, I mean, if they had to tighten down the reins, I think a lot of that was really focused on production. So, you know, inbound to manufacturing production, they tightened down the belts, and they really found out kind of at a bare minimum what they could run with and sustain their business models. So I think kind of coming out of that, growing into, you know, economies picking back up, volumes are coming back up, I think that they've maybe have a better sense of comfort, whereas the aftermarket side may have been, you know, if it's not broke, don't fix it, right? So they've now come out of that, and I think a lot of companies are maybe focusing more on, you know, hey, this is a great piece of business for us. How do I grow this? Where can we go to get better, and or where can I go to be more profitable within that segment? So yeah, I think a lot of the companies where we're getting, I guess, a lot of their focus, right, is in that area in terms of it's either strategic growth or, again, how do I support my customers better, in the belief that if I can get closer to my customers, if I can improve my service times, and still maintain my current logistics costs, then it's a no-brainer for me. Why wouldn't I do that? By default, I'm going to pick up market share because I am closer to my customer, and they're going to pick my product because it's available, whereas your product isn't, so I win, right?
Yeah, I think great points there, and I think you already touched upon some of this, which is going to be my next question. Is, you know, when you look at companies that are managing, you know, their aftermarket supply chains effectively, you know, what are the key attributes for success that they have? I mean, can you share some customer examples or some customer best practices?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of I think a lot of what we're seeing is, you know, companies that are successful really have a focused business model and a strategy to handle their aftermarket division or their aftermarket section of their company. I mean, I was reading an article, a study from Deloitte and Touche, and they were talking about Siemens Medical, for instance. Was one of those companies from an aftermarket perspective has really dominated, and it's a combination of service and part reliability and the ability to get the parts there. So again, focusing their services specifically to support the aftermarket side of the house. You know, Rolls-Royce jet engines was another company that they pointed out in terms of the ability to, again, basically pay for the use of the engine or pay for uptime. So in other words, they've kind of put the onus upon themselves to say, you know, if my jet engine that I sell to you isn't working, you're not going to pay for it. So therefore, I'm going to ensure that I've got the service, I've got the parts, I've got the people that can do the repair work to get that back up and running. So I mean, I think a lot of that, again, is just around focus of that service, and then going forward and saying, how do I make that happen? What are the tools, and what does the supply chain look like to fit my business model? You know, we've talked to a lot of customers that really, again, the spectrum in terms of demand and what their needs are vary significantly. You know, an example would be, for instance, a company that maybe is concerned about their service technicians, called windshield time, right? So how do I get my service parts closer to my technicians in the field, so they're not doing, you know, I'm not paying these high wages to get parts out to a driver, paying high wages to get this driver driving from point A to B. I'd rather have him focused on doing the repairs in the house or at the location as opposed to driving. So how can I get my product closer to him? Or how can I service in a new market and get my products closer to my customers? Again, I think a lot of the thought behind that too is really understanding what those needs are, from a data-driven approach. And I think, in my opinion, those companies that have looked at that, they've looked at the data, they've looked at the demand, they've looked at the consumption, and they've tried to really marry up their logistics system to kind of fill what they envision to be kind of the optimum supply chain to support them.
Yeah, it seems like you brought up some good examples there. I think the airline engine one is a good example. I think what I'm seeing as well is, leveraging this part of the business to drive business process outsourcing, right? So in addition to producing the parts, is also managing, the service part, providing that service as well. And I think that leads to some very interesting tighter relationships, or doing some BPO, business process outsourcing, between the parts manufacturers and their customers, which again drives services, drives parts, and then also enables more strategic type of relationships with customers. And I imagine your last point there, with getting parts to technicians faster. What I see as kind of a big challenge is around inventory optimization, and kind of where do you keep the inventory? How do you move that inventory, and be have it in the most being able to balance the costs of inventory with the speed to market, if you will. And I assume that that's probably one of the big challenges that companies face in this area, and those that do that well are among the ones that are the most successful at it, right?
Absolutely, and I think our belief, and I think our approach as a whole, and I guess my shtick, as again being kind of a former engineer, I'm all about the data analysis, and we talk a lot about its stratification, its inventory stratification. Again, I'm not going to. I would never recommend to anybody that you treat your A parts or your AA parts the same as you would your D parts. I mean, there's a different cost to serve. There's a different expectation in terms of the demand and the ability to get those parts. And quite honestly, on a D part or an E part, you may be one of the only players out there. So your customer may be able to wait a little bit longer, and you're not putting your customer at risk by the need to have it right there, right available immediately. But absolutely, I think it's the data-driven approach, and really just trying to kind of put all those things into different categories and classifications, and understand, it's your cost to serve really, and understand, do I treat, again, from a customer stratification, should my service expectations be the same for my top customer, or the very bottom tier customer, and understanding, again, where is it and why am I doing these things? Do I have a global business process that's the same for everybody, or does it really change slightly based on different rules and different parameters? And yeah, I would certainly say that the companies that are successful in those areas have and or are still in the process of tackling those challenges, and in doing that type of exercise, and getting and figuring out the equation, because at the end of the day, it's cost, right? I mean, it's just all about cost. I mean, the market's gonna bear what it's gonna bear for the price of your part or the labor of your service, and you're not if you're not kind of slowly eating away at those costs you incur along the way to get it there, then by chance somebody else is, and somebody else is going to take over your position within that segment. So
great. So you're obviously working at a leading logistics service provider, and working with many different clients in this area. I mean, there's a role for 3PLs to help companies in their aftermarket supply chain. So what is the role? I mean, how can a 3PL help a client, a customer in these industries with their aftermarket supply chains, and what should companies look for? What kind of attributes should they look for in a service provider to help them?
yeah, well, I think I think from Ryder's perspective, a lot of the value that we bring is the ability to kind of do that analysis and that stratification on your inventory. I mean, again, within our supply chain group, a lot of the intelligence that we bring, we've got a very large pool of very smart people, very smart engineers, and we spend a lot of money on the tools to do that modeling, and the strategic modeling, and kind of the what-if analysis. So from a 3PL perspective, you either have the option to invest in that technology or those resources, be it, in your company, or you could look to outsource that activity and really not brunt the full burden of those tools and technology. I think the other side of it is from, again, we talk about parts distribution. If you have a very, I think a lot of the places where we see it's big boxes. I mean, again, I talk about part proliferation is huge. So, I mean, that leads to very large, big box warehouses with slower moving type product. That, do you need that space? Is there different alternatives you could look at? Instead of having, say, one gigantic distribution center in the middle of the United States, does it make more sense to have, to share smaller pockets of warehouse space within a third-party provider's warehouse? So you're not bearing the full brunt of that. Maybe you have some sort of transactional pricing system as opposed to your fully dedicated resource pool at your warehouse or at your center. And I think the other part to that too is, and I think really all of it just boils down to the ability to leverage. Again, I talk about leveraging of our intelligence, our resource tools, our modeling tools, leveraging of warehouse space, and I think finally leveraging of the transportation cost. A lot of the providers that are out there have these extensive networks. So can they tap into their transportation network or the trucks that they're either managing or running and figure out a way to kind of slot your product in? I know we've looked at, Ryder's got 750 maintenance shops across the United States where we deliver our own service parts to. So how can we better leverage the routes where we're doing that service to drop off freight to our customers? And again, kind of share that transportation cost so they're not paying the full burden on it, and we're not paying the full burden on it either. So just the ability to leverage and kind of provide more of a flexible model.
Great examples there. I mean, one of the things that I've heard over the years that's a great opportunity, and you kind of mentioned that there with your own internal example. Obviously, you run your own maintenance shop, so you are a customer of yourself, really, because you need to get parts to those maintenance facilities and so forth. But it sounds like, based on what you just said, that you're looking for opportunities to collaborate, if you will, between balancing your internal needs and seeing opportunities how you can leverage that with some of the customers that you service as well, and kind of make it a win-win. I see an opportunity there in general for 3PLs to help facilitate that collaboration across different companies. I think there's been a lot of talk around, whether it's co-shipping or things of that nature, but historically there's been a kind of resistance to it, or people haven't really walked the talk as much. Are you seeing more of that now? Is there a greater receptivity or people taking a second look at the possibility of collaborating perhaps with other part suppliers, facilitated by a 3PL to make it a win-win for everybody?
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess a couple points you mentioned, my head's going a million miles a minute. I think, first and foremost, yeah, Ryder, so our FMS, Ryder has two divisions, our supply chain and our fleet side. So the fleet side runs the maintenance shops, and Ryder over the past couple of years has we've challenged ourselves internally on how do we internally collaborate and harness the power of Ryder. We actually just had a leadership meeting down in Orlando in March, and it was cracking the code. How can Ryder successfully crack the code and kind of tap into those different opportunities? That, again, from a customer perspective, Ryder is a customer to our supply chain group, specific to the aftermarket, and how can we better leverage that? So I think, again, we internally see that. We on our supply chain side have been trying for the past couple of years and have had successes in terms of collaboration. We've had a lot of voice of the customer meetings, and basically the overwhelming answer from all the customers is, yes, I don't care if my parts sit next to t-shirts or groceries or whatever. I mean, at the end of the day, it's just all about how can you help me reduce my costs. And I think the exercise that we've been going through for the past couple of years is it's not necessarily resistance to collaboration. It's that it's hard. I mean, it's hard, and in a lot of cases, The stars have to align to some instance to find those opportunities. And you take all this bundle of data and try and figure out the best match and where to marry that up. And it's really, to some extent, it's finding a needle in a haystack. And I think, we're still building on and working on the model to kind of perfect that. And how do we quickly find those needles, and how do we quickly collaborate and get that opportunity? And I think a lot of what we're focused on now with this aftermarket solution is saying, hey, I keep wanting to say like a transactional type model. There's this opportunity to do that and leverage that, and we want to make it easy for people to get in and easy for kind of that on-demand shipment or that on-demand service that you would need. So it's not as difficult to make the stars align and make it happen. It's just more so it happens. And working with the customers to kind of help refine that supply chain and maybe change those business rules slightly to make it where it can happen easily, repetitively, and thus reduce their overall cost.
I think that's a great point. It is such a, I view collaboration as, it really has to be an engineered, effort. I mean, really trying to find those opportunities and certainly looking for ways to facilitate that. You mentioned in your comments, the customers are, they had no problem, sharing space with, a t-shirt provider or something else. So what about sharing space with a competitor? I mean, I think that's because arguably, if you are servicing the same, aftermarket retailer, let's say, on paper at least, there are probably more synergies there because you are visiting the same facility or the same, dealerships, so on and so forth. Is there still resistance in terms of sharing space or collaborating between, companies that might view themselves as competitors, but on the flip side, there's a lot of overlap between the supply chain networks?
I would probably say their initial comment would be like, yeah, we'd prefer that not to be the case. But I mean, I think at the end of the day, it's you use the same tools that are available to you. So, for instance, from an LTL service, I mean, you and I may have the exact same product shipped, built right next door to one another. Does that mean I'm not going to use the same LTL provider to make my shipments as you do? I mean, again, at the end of the day, it's your shared it's a transportation cost. So I think ultimately the view is, again, I don't care as long as it helps me lower my transportation costs. Would I prefer that my you're not getting the same great rate that I would be getting? Yeah, I'd probably choose for that not to be the case. However, it is what it is. Either I'm going to get it, and he's going to get it as well, or I'm not going to get it and he is, type thing. So I mean, I think from that perspective, it's bottom line to them, and I think in a lot of cases, transportation logistics as a whole is viewed as an expense. And I think a lot of the times the focus is, again, how can I drive down my cost? How can I reduce this expense? Because in theory, that just all goes to the bottom line, wherever the cost can be reduced, and they can drive down that cost in that segment. So I think preference would be no, but I think in reality, where the rubber meets the road, if it's a bottom line savings to them, I think that it's not an issue. And I think fortunately for us is, we've got a very large pool of customers, again, be it from high tech to aerospace to automotive, and even within automotive, the likelihood of having, say, a brake supplier have a conflict with another brake supplier where there's a perfect collaboration opportunity, I think it's very low likelihood of that ever being an issue. So
Great point. We're kind of getting short on time here, so I've got just a couple of more questions. I just want to remind anyone who is on the program live with us, if you do have a question for Brandon, now would be the time to ask it, as we're getting ready to wrap up here. So Brandon, another topic that's getting a lot of buzz these days that I think has an impact on the aftermarket supply chain is 3D printing. And how companies are starting to use the technology to manufacture spare parts and repair parts on demand. Do you see this as a threat or an opportunity for aftermarket supply chain management?
I think honestly, I think it's both. I mean, I think the reality of 3D printing is it's coming, right? And you're right, the buzz is everywhere. Yeah, I think that it's a threat from a supplier standpoint. Again, I think it's an opportunity from potentially from an OEM or from anybody's standpoint. Again, you talk about the number one challenge. I think the first thing I said was just parts proliferation. I think 3D printing essentially solves a lot of your challenges associated with your very slow-moving parts. The ability to basically manufacture on demand, I mean, it's perfect for from an aftermarket perspective. I think, I don't believe that 3D printing in aftermarket is ever going to replace your high running, your A and your B product. I mean, I still think that those will have some sort of, call it a traditional supply chain. But my belief is that from an aftermarket specific supply chain, it's your slower moving parts that where there's a fit. And again, it's going to allow the customers or the end customer basically to have kind of that on-demand service. No different than my wife today. She'll take and print pictures and shoot them up to Walgreens or wherever, and then walk up an hour later and pick them up. No different, if I need a part for a 1957 Chevy, potentially I could go order this online, pay online, and then go pick it up. Or who knows, maybe have an Amazon drone deliver it one day or something, right? So yeah, I mean, I think it's an opportunity within the aftermarket sector as a whole. I think it's a threat from to some, certainly. I think suppliers. Again, I think it's all about how each one of those people, the distributors, the suppliers, the OEMs, how they plan that into their business model and can really use that to their advantage or disadvantage. So it will be interesting to see, though.
Yeah, I mean, I think the technology is making a lot of advancements. I think we're not quite there yet. For a variety of reasons that where it's going to be a threat. The next 2 or 3 years or anything in that kind of shorter time frame. But it's certainly something that I think it needs to be paid close attention to. And like you said, something that companies need to be thinking about whether it is an opportunity or a threat. And if it is an opportunity, how to start preparing for it and start, leveraging it. And if it is a threat, how to minimize it or how to, turn it into an opportunity instead. To wrap up, Brandon, this has been a great, conversation. Obviously, like I tell all my guests every week, we only get to scratch the surface on the topics we talk about. But, as a way for people that are listening to, to this today or on demand, what questions should companies ask themselves to kind of assess, if their aftermarket supply chain capabilities are best in class or if they need, some improvement?
Yeah, no, that's a fair question, and I think I guess first and foremost, what comes to mind is just number one: are you focusing on it? I mean, is there attention on the aftermarket side? Do you have a strategy? Are you looking at it? If you do have a strategy, are you working towards that, or at least looking to understand better how you get there? And then again, understanding from within that strategy, 3D printing, for example, what are some of those things that coming down the line or coming down the pipe that could impact your strategy, and do you understand what those are? Actually, I just read an article yesterday. A colleague of mine sent me about 3D printing and said that within the next 10 years, it's going to be a mainstream form of called parts production. So it's coming, and those things may impact your strategy. I think that again, understanding and the ability to get and look at speed to market. I think from an aftermarket perspective, a lot of customers that we talk to and that we deal with, and even within the market as a whole, going to these conferences and expos, a lot of what we're hearing again is if I don't have that product readily available to give to that customer, they're going down the street to the next guy, to the next guy, to the next guy until they find it. And if I tell them it's going to be here tomorrow, they're still going to go to the next guy until they can get it there as fast as possible. Because again, it's all about downtime. If your car is broke and it's in the shop, you don't want to hear that it's going to be tomorrow until they get the part. You can have your car tomorrow. I mean, you want it fixed, ready, going today. So again, that speed to market I think is huge. Are you achieving that? Is your lack of speed to market impacting your business model, and or if you improved your speed to market, can you grow? I think flexibility, you talk about a supply chain characteristic, right? The ability to kind of grow and change and shift your demand, shift your distribution based on where your demand is, and not be tied into a fixed cost type model. Big box, I think, is really what I keep thinking of. Again, if you grow, can you leverage existing locations? Are you not tied into these gigantic warehouses where you've invested all this money in technology and infrastructure and racking and storage and resources, or can you leverage that amongst other locations and providers and really kind of not bear the full burden of that? And I think finally is really it's data, data analytics, stratification. I think that's typically where we try and start. Our customer engagement side of it is really just trying to dig into the data and understand from marketing or market, where are you? What does your service days look like? Are you meeting those? Have you looked at your data in this way? And I think just trying to bring to light, again, all customers, all products should not necessarily be viewed the same. And if you're looking at it the same and saying, hey, it's a one-all solution, then I think that you would definitely need to kind of maybe take a closer look and revisit it, and really just try and kind of rationalize. If it is a one-all decision, then fantastic, and that works. But I think it's our belief that really you got to treat everything kind of uniquely and start to bucketize it and categorize it, and really come up with the best fit solution for almost at a SKU level to some extent.
All great questions, and certainly a great starting point for companies as they think about their aftermarket supply chains. Brandon, we're out of time. Again, thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedule to kind of share your thoughts and perspective on this market. And I'm sure that we'll have an opportunity to speak again down the road and see how this market and the trends that we talked about today continue to evolve in the years and months ahead. So again, thank you very much for making the time to be with us today.
No problem. And again, thank you very much. I appreciate the time and opportunity, and would love to come back and talk with you on anything else that may be of interest to you.
Great. And I want to thank all of you who joined us today. And for those of you that are watching on demand, if you do have a question or a comment for Brandon, you can look up this episode on talkinglogistics.com, find the episode, and post a question or comment there. And I'm sure Brandon will be more than happy to respond via that platform. So with that, again, thank you for joining us, and look forward to seeing you in a future episode of Talking Logistics. Have a great day.